Welcome to Difference She Makes, a 6-part series where you and I uncover African women transforming justice, shaping institutions, and expanding what power looks like across the continent. I'm your host, Adelle Onyango. This series is part of a broader initiative exploring how women's leadership is changing the law, not just on paper, but in everyday life. Across these episodes, you and I are discovering what truly shifts when women lead. So far, we've explored constitutions, the rules that set the vision for justice. Today, we move one level closer to daily reality, to policies. Because policies are where values become practice. They determine whose safety is protected, whose voices are heard, and whether institutions live up to the principles they claim. In this episode, we meet a woman whose work shows us how internal policies can reshape culture from the inside out, and why implementation, not intention, is what makes justice real.
If a woman has received a brief, there will be an assumption that she has done something to receive that brief. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a favor that is asked from her, a favor that is termed in South Africa as the red carpet. You have to walk the red carpet, or there's the couch in the office, or sex for briefs. How have those complaints been dealt with? And the response that I got when I engaged the JSC was that there has not been any complaints of sexual harassment in the judiciary ever. And there has not been any complaints. That was bizarre.
But before we begin, I've got a question for you. What's one policy you wish every workplace had and actually followed? Let me know in the comments. She has been at the center of shaping institutional policy within South Africa's legal system and contributing to reforms that protect women, strengthen accountability, and rebuild trust in judicial spaces. From sexual harassment policies to internal governance frameworks, Zikhona Ndlebe has played a key role in turning high-level commitments into lived everyday protections. Today, she helps us understand why policies matter and how they change culture and what their implementation reveals about an institution's integrity. I would like to know first how you got into the work that you do. Was there a spark? Was there a moment of inspiration that you're like, this is what I'm going to do with my life?
It started early on.
Yeah.
It started early on in my life. So my mom, it's a story.
Yeah.
My mom works as a filing clerk in one of the big law firms in South Africa.
Okay.
So when I was young, in primary school, I'd go to her work, wait for her, and then we'd go home together.
Yeah.
And I remember particularly one day I asked her, because she would get a pile of files from these gentlemen wearing suits and these ladies wearing suits, and she would be busy in her typewriter typing away. And I asked her one day, so what do you do? Why are you here? You're always so busy. You've got all of these files. What is it that you're doing? So she explained to me that she's a filing clerk. And then I asked, so what do those other guys that always keep giving you work do? What are they? So she told me that it's lawyers. And that's where the interest sparked for me. And that's when I realized that I love you, Mom. You're a filing clerk, but I want to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
So that's when I made the decision. And I also had a second choice, which was geographic information system, but I'm not good at maths. So I realized I can't, it's not going to work for me. So I leaned towards the law.
Yeah.
That's how I got into becoming an attorney. And then judicial governance. So when I got admitted, I started practicing, specializing in labor law. But then I soon realized that it was a matter of chasing fees. So it didn't really speak to who I am, because sometimes you'd see that a client has a good case, but because we're chasing fees, you don't give enough attention to that case. So there was a sense of injustice for me. So that's when I decided, let me just take a leap of faith and get into something else. And that's how I ended up in research, judicial governance. Yeah.
One thing I'm learning is that within the legal system, there are policy gaps that affect women in the legal space. Have you experienced that? Have you seen those gaps and how they adversely affect women?
I really think that there are. I agree with you. There are definitely policy gaps that do affect women. But specifically to the issue of sexual harassment, it's a gap that has been there for the longest time. And weird enough, it's a gap that has been in the judiciary, which is supposed to hold people accountable, apply the law, but does not do the same in its own setting. So there's been that one policy gap. And also over the years, I've also realized that there's another policy gap that no one talks about, which is there are no policies, and even if there are, those policies are not implementable. Policies relating to people who are differently abled. So you'd find that in a law firm, there's a person who is differently abled, but because they are not accommodated, they are not able to perform the tasks, and they find themselves in terrible predicaments where they have to be told it's either you perform or you resign. And that's not something that should happen. There should be policies that regulate how a firm and how people will function who are differently abled and how they will be accommodated. So it's policy gaps that affect women specifically, and it's policy gaps that affect people in general.
Yeah. A lot of times we just hear the word policy. We have this policy. But for those of us who are on ground, right, and we want something that's tangible, that we can feel the safety come back.
Yeah.
What would you define a policy as for us?
So in simple terms, I'd say that a policy, it is a set of guidelines or rules that regulate how people conduct themselves. It ensures that there is ethical and professional conduct in a work setting. So basically, it's a benchmark tool that people need to consider when they are in a work setting or in a professional setting. It regulates basically how people conduct themselves. And I think it's important that organizations do have policies, because firstly, if you don't have a policy and an issue arises, how are you going to deal with that issue? What standards are you going to consider in dealing with an issue? For example, in South Africa, now there's currently a tribunal that's underway. It relates to the Judge President of the Eastern Cape High Court. And there's been allegations that he sexually harassed a judge's secretary. And at the time when those allegations occurred, there was no policy. At the time when there was the complaint lodged with the Judicial Service Commission, there was no policy in place. So now the tribunal is ongoing, and the policy that's currently in place does not apply retrospectively. So now there is that predicament. What is going to be applied in the tribunal that's currently underway? Because that policy, it's there, but it doesn't apply in the tribunal. It will apply to other tribunals that would take place in the future. So that's why I think it's important to have policies in place, so that you have set of guidelines that you're going to consider when you are holding people accountable.
We'll get back to our insightful conversation with Zikona shortly. But first, did you know that South Africa's judiciary had already signed a sexual harassment policy before Chief Justice Mandisa Maya took office? But it was widely seen as too vague to drive real accountability. The policy was amended, and in 2025, a stronger, clearer policy was signed. Getting to know more about the work Zikona does and the passion she has, I knew that there is one person she had to meet while in Kenya, Nerima Were. She's a feminist, Pan-Africanist, human rights lawyer who was also voted one of the top 80 women in law in 2024. At its core, Nerima's work aims to protect women, just like Zikona.
I do think sexual harassment does have a role to play in how women experience the workplace.
Absolutely.
And I know this is an area that you're very passionate about. And I know there's also like a very huge case happening in South Africa.
Big.
And the judiciary with a judge being accused of sexual harassment by one of his researchers or an assistant.
It's a secretary.
Right? His secretary. And this is also like such a huge problem for us in two ways. One, very limited protection. So we have Sexual Harassment and the Sexual Offences Act, which is very broad. We have the Law Society having a model sexual harassment policy and requiring, or at least asking of employers to have sexual harassment policies, and we have the Employment Act also requiring this, but that's just like a very, very bare minimum standard. So where we go beyond the policy in terms of what enforcement looks like, what creating a healthy and safe workspace looks like, that is very grey. It's so grey, and a lot of young women in the legal fraternity do experience harassment, and it impacts their career trajectory. But they don't have the tools or the language to engage with it. And then also there's this really big thing of, what if I'm blacklisted? Like, where will I work?
That happens.
Because it's a boys' club. They talk to each other. So if I accuse you, will your next 4 friends hire me? Must I go out on my own? It is difficult to go out on your own.
Yeah.
It's really quite difficult. But I would like to hear more about your work with the judiciary and the sexual harassment, because we're also thinking through what that looks like for us here.
Yeah. With the work that we did with the sexual harassment policy, we started with having focus group discussions with people in the legal fraternity. We met up with attorneys, advocates, magistrates, judges, and had them in one room and started unpacking the issue of sexual harassment. And there was a confirmation that there is sexual harassment. And if a woman has received a brief, which is good, there will be an assumption that she has done something to receive that brief. And if she wants to be involved in a good case for her career, there's going to be a favor that is asked from her, a favor that is termed in South Africa as the red carpet. You have to walk the red carpet, or there's the couch in the office, or sex for briefs. So that those terms that we came across, but not, it's terms that people were not comfortable talking about. So we had to first unpack those issues and actually name them and make people comfortable in having those discussions. I think that was the starting point for us in actually ensuring that there's a sexual harassment policy for the South African judiciary and the legal fraternity.
When you were going through this this process, you're doing your focus group, you're starting to lobby for this policy to, be implemented or to come to fruition. What pushback are you experiencing?
There was a bit of pushback because people didn't want to acknowledge that there's a problem. So it took us, with advocacy work, which is something that I love, you need to repeat the same thing over and over and over again in order for people to understand what you're saying. And then you also need to have that one ask, which is that there has to be a policy to guide the judiciary in relation to sexual harassment, because the complaint structures that we have are ineffective. So coming to the complaint structures, it was also a challenge for us because people did not want to understand that they are there, but they are not effective when it comes to this particular problem. So we had to speak to different people. We had to also engage the JSC, the Judicial Service Commission, and find out from them, how many complaints have you had in relation to sexual harassment, and how have those complaints been dealt with? And the response, I remember correctly, that I got when I engaged the JSC was that there has not been any complaints of sexual harassment in the judiciary ever. That was bizarre, because there's a problem, we know, and there has not been any complaints. That did not sound correct. So we had to engage different stakeholders, even with the Magistrates Commission. We had to engage them and ask, how many complaints do you have? How do you deal with them? They've got complaints, but there is no proper record of those complaints because they are so protracted, and people end up leaving the complaint and just moving on with their lives because it's just taking too long. So there's been various pushback from the structures, I would say, and from the general public, when we speak about this issue, that there is a problem, and they would be in denial about it. So we had to conscientize people about it, and then start the work after we'd done that.
So I would say this this sexual harassment policy of 2025 is like a huge turning point.
Yes.
Why would you define it as that from your personal standpoint?
Let's first start with the 2024 one.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So the 2024 policy that was signed by the former Chief Justice Raymond Zondo as he was leaving office, because it was signed on his last day of office.
Yeah.
When we became aware of that policy, it became a big issue. It became a big issue for me personally as well, because I read it and it said nothing. It said nothing because it was basically reiterating what is already there and what we know for a fact is a problem. So it was saying that people should go to the Magistrates Commission to lay a complaint. They should go to the Judicial Service Commission to lay a complaint. And then the judiciary would be made aware of this policy. That does not assist with the problem.
Yeah.
So that's why at that point I came out very strongly to say, no, this policy is not working and it needs to be repealed and amended. So with the 2025 one, when you look at it and when you read it, it's totally different. It adds a lot of value to people in the court setting, and specifically to women who experience sexual harassment. It has a victim-centered approach. So it considers what the victim or the complainant has gone through. It provides, makes provision for people to be psychologically supported. It also establishes the gender desk in the Office of the Chief Justice. And it allows people to get the support that they need in such situations. So it is a turning point because of that. It's a well thought through policy. And if you compare it with the previous one, we became aware that people in the magistracy had not been consulted about it. So with policies, it's important to have stakeholder engagements.
Yeah.
You cannot just come up with a policy and expect everyone to follow.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. People need to know what it is that they are following. They need to contribute to the policy and also feel like that they are adding value to the change that is happening. Yeah. So with this policy, that's why I think it's a turning point. Yeah. And I am also confident that it's going to make a huge difference, especially if there is training to ensure that it is implementable.
What do you want to see in the implementation that will make you feel comfortable that this policy is doing what you wanted it to do?
So with this 2025 policy, there's the gender desk in the Office of the Chief Justice. Yeah. So if I were to see that gender desk actually take off and be able to perform its functions and assist people, not only judges, not only magistrates, but also cleaners, security guards, interpreters, clerks of the court, that would bring a lot of satisfaction and it would bring the policy alive. Also, the victim-centered approach. If the policy is actually able to provide psychosocial support to people who've experienced sexual harassment, that would make a lot of difference. Currently, there's supposed to be a landline in South Africa that assists people in the judiciary. If a person calls in, they'd be able to speak to someone and talk their issues through. But most of the time, those landlines or helplines are not functioning. So if we were to have something that is functioning to provide psychosocial support to people who have experienced sexual harassment, that would assist. If we were to have that psychosocial support and that gender desk established and the training, that would make a lot of difference.
And so like when we look at South Africa's model, so like of pushing for this particular policy, and even how the policy is put together, what do you think other African countries can adapt?
I would definitely say that if other African countries also have structures that are similar to the ones that we have, the JSC, the Magistrates Commission, those structures are good structures. But when it comes to this particular issue of sexual harassment, like I've said, they are not effective. They protract cases. A sexual harassment case cannot take years to resolve. it's not a complaint like any other complaint. It is sensitive.
Yeah.
It is time sensitive as well. So if they've got structures similar to the JSC and the Magistrates Commission, they must think about having an independent body or a structure that's different that will deal with such a sensitive issue to ensure that there is integrity in the judicial system and people can actually speak up about their experiences. Because if you've lodged a complaint of sexual harassment and it takes you years, at some point you're going to be tired, you're not going to follow through, and the perpetrator is going to continue what they're doing to someone else.
Yeah. And someone else who's a victim is going to watch that and be like, there's no point of me even voicing anything, right? It does have a ripple effect.
We, I think, are also in the nascent stages of our very honest discussions around sexual harassment as a country. And we aren't at the reckoning yet, but it's good to see that there are some steps you can follow to avoid a reckoning where it's women coming after so much violence, where we can preempt and say, you know what, we are seeing best practices. We have an act on sexual offenses, but that's not sufficient for sexual harassment. We have models on policies, but enforcement is very weak because it's just a requirement that you have the policy. How that's enforced really would often require somebody to go back to the court, especially because law firms are not well regulated in the sense that the practice, the day-to-day challenges within the law firm are not regulated. The judiciary is also another kettle on its own. But I do think we have a lot of goodwill with our CJ, and the potential of actually advancing this work does exist with the current bench. And it's really important that we pick up on the gains. I think we've learned a lot from South Africa in terms of the constitution. Why not this?
Definitely.
We're really excited to see what we can do.
But you know, with South Africa as well, when we were looking at having a new Chief Justice, we looked at Kenya, which is a female Chief Justice, and we made an example of Kenya. It's possible.
Yes,
I did not understand why there was a question about whether South Africa is ready to have a woman Chief Justice. Like, I thought that was just an absurd question, even in the JSC interviews. So I believe that Kenya it is progressive. So even with the sexual harassment policy, it's something that Kenya can definitely do.
Yeah.
A policy for the entire judiciary. And I also I'd like to believe that the leadership and the Chief Justice in Kenya would be welcoming to discussions around a policy for its judiciary.
I think that would be a fair belief.
So.
One of the things that influences us the most is cultural norms, right? And so what do you think we need to be aware of when we're doing the trainings and the sensitization, when we're speaking to safety for women, when we're speaking to issues, sexual harassment, to a group of people who perhaps like that, those cultural norms are going to be like fighting within them?
We cannot run away from the fact that there are cultural differences. So if you take, for example, the tribunal that's underway in South Africa relating to the Judge President of the Eastern Cape, Mbenenge, during cross-examination, there was a point where it was said persistence is part of culture when it comes to trying to get a woman to like you. You have to be persistent. But there's a certain degree, there's a certain boundary that cannot be crossed, regardless of what culture says. So we need to be aware of those things. So in one culture, persistence might be the norm, but we need to look at what the law says.
Yes.
And how the conduct is going to make the other person feel. Because sexual harassment, it's a subjective issue. What you might perceive as sexual harassment, someone else might not perceive as sexual harassment. What someone else might let slide, I might not let slide. If a person walks up to me and whispers in my ear, which has happened, and says, it's a pity, it's always the beautiful ones that have to go through traditional healing processes. Someone might say, it's just a comment, it's just a compliment. But the manner in which it is portrayed, or the way that I receive it, might mean to me that it's uncomfortable. actually harassment. So there are those dynamics that we need to consider. So that's why it's important to have the training. And also when you are having the training, you cannot have a blanket training. You're going to, you need to look at the space that you are going into and assess the different cultural norms that are there that will have to be debunked so that the law can be applied properly. For example, if you go to the Eastern Cape, the culture in the Eastern Cape will be different in South Africa than the culture in KZN or than the culture in the Western Cape. So you need to actually go there beforehand and look at the differences that you'll encounter before you actually go in and train people. Because some people in other courts would say that there's no need for a sexual harassment. Even judges would say that there's no need for a sexual harassment. There is no such a thing because of how they are raised, because of their culture. But reality is that there is a law, there is harassment policies in other places. There needs to be policies that are going to be able to protect people, specifically women and vulnerable groups in work setting. But we're also hoping that more people will be able to speak out against sexual harassment. As a young Black woman, it's difficult, but it's something that we have to do. We have to continue doing it because if we don't, those who come after us will experience the same misfortunes that we have been experiencing in the legal profession. So it's not only about us, it's not about now, but it's about the future. And what it holds for those who will come after us. You might not be experiencing what you are ignoring, but people that will come after you will experience those misfortunes. And those people might not be distant from you. It might actually be your own children, it might actually be your own siblings, your friends. So it's important to speak out when there is injustice. Yeah.
I've enjoyed my conversation with Zikona, and I hope you have too. Now, I had asked you, what's one policy you wish every workplace had and actually followed? Drop your answer in the comments, and as you do that, let's hear Zikona's take.
So, in the past few years, I would have said the sexual harassment policy, but we've got that. But currently, I do see that there's a gap when it comes to policies for differently abled people. And those policies would assist not only women, but everyone in general. I have encountered at least 2 situations where differently abled people were mistreated, and not just anywhere, but within legal practice. And I'm really hoping that in the future, there will be policies in relation to them that will be implementable, because we know that what we have on paper is not enough, that it has to be brought to life by people.
Zikhona Ndlebe reminds us that policies are not symbolic gestures. They are powerful tools that shape how safe, fair, and accountable our institutions truly are. Difference She Makes is part of a wider effort to understand how women experience the law and how those experiences are shifting across Africa. In the next episode, we continue this journey by examining how culture and everyday practice can either reinforce policy or quietly undo it. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss the next episode of Difference She Makes.
But now some environments are so toxic. I brought him something I'd written, he went through it. He was like, I told you to write it like this, and he banged the table and threw it.
Oh my goodness.
I've never forgotten that. That's why I was like, that one I'm going to change. I even had a colleague who was hiring, and then I asked him, are you taking a male or a female? But surprisingly, he told me female, but now the reason he was saying female is because he feels females are not that aggressive. So this person is not going to steal my clients.
What?